Righty. Are we all recording, Professor Brager? We are. Perfect. It doesn't let me. It fusses at everyone else and lets you know that it's recording, but it doesn't let the host know. Righty. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let's go ahead and get started. I know we're going to have a few more people join us, so let me admit them. All righty, good afternoon. We're thrilled to have you with us today. My name is Julie Haynes, and I'm the director for the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University. We are an affiliate of the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University. And I see that Dr. Copenhagen is with us today, so we always love to have her with us. Thank you, Dr. Copenhagen, for joining us. Today, we have a really fascinating conversation in store for you. We have with us Dawn Wilson, who is a professional photographer and award-winning photographer. I'm going to introduce her formally, and then we're going to hear from Dawn a little bit about her trajectory, how she got involved in her current career. For those of you who have joined us before, you know that one of the things that I like to do is not only highlight important female leaders in the communication industry, but I also like for us to take a look at some people who might not have a traditional path, things that you might not really think about if you're a student who is in a communication or communication adjacent field. I do also want to remind everybody that the center programming is open to everyone, regardless of your gender, sexual identity, race, any of those categories. We welcome you here, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. So, without further ado, let me introduce Dawn for you. Dawn Wilson is a professional and award-winning nature photographer and writer, specializing in images and stories about wildlife of high latitudes and high altitudes of the Rocky Mountains in Alaska. She received a communications degree from Rowan University. So we're thrilled to have one of our own. I'm very proud of her. She also received an MBA in marketing from Temple University and completed a computer graphics program at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. She leads multiple workshops each year in North and South America to photograph wildlife. And I should mention that she's in the middle of doing that right now. So we're really appreciative of her of taking time out from her tours to speak with us. She's also served 2 terms as president of the North American Nature Photography Association and has been the co-host of the Nature Photographer podcast. So welcome, Dawn. We're thrilled to have you with us. Also, real quick, let me know if you have any questions. You're welcome to put those in the chat and at the end of our conversation. I already have some questions that students have wanted to know, but if you have any other any questions, we're happy to address those in the conversation. So Dawn, please tell us about how you got from South Jersey and Rowan to the Rocky Mountains of Colorado.
Okay. Well, can you guys see this?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Continue to share. All right. So, I'm sure as students you get overloaded with slides, but I think the visuals, especially since I am a visual person, definitely help with what we're talking about today. So, I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you very much for letting me have a chance to kind of talk about how I wound up coming from Glassboro, how I wound up in Colorado, and then all the different places that I've gone. This could have been a very, very long conversation about a lot of those travels, but we're going to focus today on kind of that path from out of Glassboro and into some of these different job opportunities that I've had. So as you can see, this is a good visual I actually grew up in Glassboro. So I moved out to Colorado, which is where I am. So this pinpoint is where I am now based here in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And then this kind of visually shows you some of the other places I've gone. I've been out to the Aleutian Islands, which is up here in the upper left, but in the lower southwest portion of Alaska, very, very remote islands out there. I've been all the way up to the Beaufort Sea in Kaktovik in Alaska. So that's the farthest north I've been. I've been to Hudson Bay to photograph polar bears. And the farthest south I have been is down to the Amazon jungle of Peru. A lot of people actually don't realize that the Amazon River actually starts in Peru. So we go to the headwaters there to do a photo tour. And I've also been to Belize and many, many other places here in the US itself. So this is just I hope just the start of places that I have been. I have a lot of other places I'm looking forward to seeing. I am going to the Galapagos later this year, which is actually just off the coast of Ecuador. It's part of Ecuador. So a little bit about my background. I did grow up in Glassboro. So I am one of those townies that people sometimes make fun of, but I did grow up in Glassboro. And on top of it, my father was a police officer in town. So that made it even more fun. Glassboro at the time and still is one of the best communication schools in the East Coast. So that was what I decided to pursue. And then in 2002, I moved to Colorado. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. As Julie mentioned, I do have an undergraduate degree. My bachelor's is in communications. My MBA is in marketing from Temple University. I studied computer graphics at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, which is unfortunately no longer there. And I have also studied photography both in the undergraduate program at Rowan as well as the Art Institute out here in Colorado, which is also another school that is no longer in existence. So I spent 20 years in corporate marketing, and that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, about the traditional path that most of us think that we need to follow, and why I am no longer doing that as much as I can. I have always enjoyed photography. I didn't take it super, super seriously, but I did a lot of it as I was growing up. And then obviously over the years, especially after I moved to Colorado, I really got into a lot of the nature photography. But in 2013, due to some personal issues in my life, I had lost a couple of people that were important to me, and it both unexpectedly as well as some other things that happened with career-wise. I decided to walk away from the corporate marketing world and pursue photography and writing full time. It was definitely a pretty scary thing to do, and I kind of did it unexpectedly just because of those deaths that happened in my life at the time. That I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to do this. I need to pursue some things that I'm passionate about. I do, for the most part, specialize in wildlife photography of high altitudes and high latitudes of the Rocky Mountains in Alaska. But as you saw from the map, I've been going down to Peru. I've been going out to Belize. I am pretty much, I know people ask, what's your favorite animal to photograph? And I am pretty much one of those people that love to photograph anything that's out in front of me. I just love being outdoors. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I did write a book a couple of years ago called 100 Things to Do in Estes Park. I have lots of other book projects I'd like to pursue. Um, and I am a past president of NAMPA, which is the North American Nature Photography Association. Among other things, I currently serve on a board for the Estes Valley Watershed Coalition too. So looking at protecting watersheds and wildlife habitat in Estes Valley, just outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. So these are just some visuals. These kind of show, my beach bum days. I did have a shore house for a couple of summers in Long Beach Island. Most of us that grew up in New Jersey always enjoyed going down to the beach. But I worked in Philadelphia for several years as well. So that's kind of what the Northeast is about. You have that mix of city and urban and beach and some of those fun things. So, I was very traditional in that regard in some of the things that I enjoyed. So since then, I now live in Estes Park, Colorado, which is just outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. We are the east entrance to the park, and that is why I live there. I have elk that walk through my yard. I have all kinds of really, really cool birds that nest right in my backyard. We have moose that I can see on a daily basis. It's very, very different than New Jersey. It's not easy to live up there. I live at 7,500 feet. It's windy in the winter, and there's all kinds of things. We get a lot of tourists. We have nearly 4.5 million tourists that show up in the summertime. So there are a lot of challenges, but I would not give it up for anything. It's something that I definitely enjoy doing. Never even thought about it when I grew up in New Jersey, that's for sure. But I do have a lot of goals. I am in the process of, I'd love to see all the national wildlife refuges in the US. There are a ton of them, so it's a very difficult challenge that I have set in front of myself. I'd love to visit all the national parks. I have about 16 left. I am working on Colorado turns 150 this year, just like the US turns 250. And I'm documenting what that looks like. How has Colorado changed in the last 150 years, and what's the next 150 years going to look like, especially in how it impacts wildlife. But there's a lot of places I'd still like to get to. I haven't been to Iceland. I haven't been to Greenland. Those are too high on my list. Norway, which I haven't even added in here, is actually the top one on my list. Galapagos, I mentioned, I'll be down there later this year. And then I'd love to find ways to get to the Falkland Islands and Africa. I might have an opportunity to visit Africa later this year. So there's just so much to see out there, and there's never enough time to get to it all. Um, but to do all of that, I actually write about my travels. I write about wildlife. Talk about hiking. I've done a hike of the week column for a local newspaper. I have all kinds of different things. I'm just constantly coming up with ideas, and it's sometimes the ideas are the easy part, and it's making them into reality that can be the challenge. If you could see my desk right now with all the post-its on here that are just from the last few days, I'm always pursuing something, always staying really, really busy, and that's just kind of the nature of doing this type of work. And I did travel full time in an RV for 15 months, photographing the U.S. That's usually something that a lot of people don't know about me, and that was a pretty special opportunity as well. So back in my Rowan days, and it's really kind of crazy to think about how long ago it was now, and the university has just changed so much in that time. I did join Alpha Epsilon Phi in 1989. They are one of the few sororities that remains on campus or have not changed their name since then. So I'm pretty proud of them. Hopefully they can stay that way there. I did work on the WIT staff for 2 years for my junior and senior year. So I did mostly production work, but I did a little bit of writing, a little bit of photography, some couple little illustrations. But I basically pulled the newspaper together every week. And I majored in communications, but I had a liberal arts focus. So the college now has it looks like it's set up very, very differently. You get a major in public relations or you get a degree in I think I saw that advertising was one of the degrees now. Back then, it was actually a communications degree, and then you had a focus. You would pick a focus like public relations or advertising, and I picked a liberal arts focus because I wanted to be a little bit more well-rounded with a little bit of experience and knowledge about different areas of communications, which turns out to actually have been a pretty good thing to do, I think, just because of how things changed a lot over the years. I mean, with digital media, the internet really wasn't around when I was in college, which is also kind of crazy to think. But all of that, with digital media, things have just changed so drastically, and it's changing quickly and continues to change. AI is going to be a huge, huge part of how we communicate moving forward in the future. Um, the other big change was the school was also called Glassboro State when I started. It was Glassboro State College. It had just been ranked on Playboy's list of top party schools. That is definitely not the case for the university these days. That's changed quite a bit. And when I graduated, it was Rowan College. So Henry Rowan had donated his $100 million endowment while I was actually at the school. So I saw the name change. And then since then, it's been renamed again to Rowan University. And the College of Communications didn't exist. It was just a major. It was, it was something within the college itself. So that's another piece that has changed pretty drastically. So I know one of the things Julie asked me to talk about was some of the classes that I enjoyed, some of the programs that I enjoyed. I definitely love like the journalism and the public relations, my mass media classes. I enjoyed those things that kind of combined the photography and the writing, and it became storytelling. I think it was not so much that I wanted to be a writer. I definitely did not want to be a hard news person, which was something that I learned over, taking in the 4 years I was there and taking those journalism classes. My personality is just not that kind of person. I was not into hard news. I didn't want to be standing out in front of people's homes trying to get, the first photo of somebody coming out of the house, whatever the situation might be. That just wasn't what I wanted. So, and I have told people over the years, I wish that there had been a little bit more at the time about what soft news was and feature stories and some of the environmental topics that were starting to become, a little bit more, centrally focused and becoming, bigger news stories at the time that we now have, is pretty much part of our day-to-day experiences. So I do wish that there were some communications or journalism classes focused on conservation and environmental topics. Those types of classes just weren't offered in the Northeast in the 90s. And that was part of the reason that I moved out of New Jersey and over to Colorado, because I just felt like my interests were much, much more aligned with what was happening in Colorado, as both from a lifestyle perspective and a communications perspective, journalism perspective. So nowadays there's actually quite a few universities that offer these types of programs. I know I was asking Julie about what kind of courses that Rowan has, and it sounds like there are a few. I would love to see them expand that, or even develop a program, whether it's an online certificate program or something around environmental studies or conservation communications. But there are other universities that are starting to develop those types of programs. Some of them, there's two right in Colorado. Texas A&M has, I think, it was the first. I think it might still be the only one that's actually a wildlife photography focused program. So there's lots of options out there these days. I mean, most of these are actually graduate programs, just because you get an undergraduate communications degree, and then if you really want to specialize in the conservation communications arena, then you can go on and get some of these certificates or a master's degree or something. And I think that's something that can be pretty valuable these days to really, really pinpoint in on your interests and your skills. So the classes that I continue to use the most definitely are still journalism. On a daily basis, I'm still writing press releases. I'm still writing articles. I'm still pitching stories. My writing experience and magazine article writing class are definitely something that have throughout the last 30, 35 years have become just a big part of what I do on a daily basis. I do use some graphic design. That's actually changed a lot over the years, so I don't really do a ton of that anymore, but it's still good to have that knowledge. And then for today's students, my recommendation is take as much multimedia instruction as possible, because that is where things are going. Whether it's artificial intelligence, Amanda teaches a virtual reality program. It sounds like Rowan even has a whole virtual reality studio. So get involved in those things. Those types of things just weren't available to us back in the day. And on top of it, Rowan just didn't have that kind of funding when I was there. I mean, that's the other thing that's changed at Rowan. So students there are actually pretty lucky. And then you have all those resources, being so close to New York City and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., you have so many resources in that regard. And Washington, D.C. is a huge area for conservation, whether you get involved with lobbies or different NGOs that are based down there. So you're in a really, really good location, a great university for teaching you those skill sets. And definitely use the resources that are available to network at the university. Universities are always going to have really, really good connections to nonprofits and NGOs, different researchers that are there. Get involved with those groups, one way or another, whether it's just a cold call email to a professor that you think is doing some fascinating research, or, talking to Amanda. Amanda, I know I just recently emailed Amanda about another opportunity for a photo contest that I oversee, that we're looking for a new partner on, so that you never know where those connections might lead you to. Think about how your skills can help those needing the content. Who needs content? Who needs visual, from a multimedia perspective or a video perspective or a photographic perspective. Everybody needs content. I will give the caveat, make sure you don't give away your work. That's a big thing for me. It's frustrating in the digital age to see how much people don't value the work that's being produced. So I think that's probably a whole different topic. You could probably have a whole course, a whole semester course on, how to sell yourself and how to make a business around some of this. So just keep that in mind. And look for grants for studies and research projects. They're actually, even though funding it has been cut quite a bit in the last couple of years, there's still money out there. So don't forget about what opportunities might exist through a grant. I know a lot of people, especially through NAMPA, the organization that I'm involved with, that have been a part of a project. Maybe they were just a small, part of the research. Maybe they were just an assistant. Maybe they were just handing coffee out, whatever it might have been, but you never know where those connections might lead you. So I do spend much of my time writing for magazines and newspapers. Oh, the photos aren't showing up here. I submit a lot of photos, and right now I probably even have a little bit more than it's at least 800 credits to my name, and that's for articles and photos. I always tell people, you really have to specialize. I'm really working on learning. I need to start learning more about video work. But what has kind of carried me through is that I write and I take photographs. Most people usually only do one. So in an age when, a photo editor is overwhelmed by how much content they're being they're being submitted to them, or how much a editor of a magazine is getting, I can actually be I can eliminate them needing to talk to two people and they can actually work with me on content both from a visual perspective and a written perspective. So these are just a couple of photos. I think Julie mentioned that I'm actually not in Colorado right now. I am down in Louisiana. I just finished up a tour in Louisiana and Mississippi to photograph some. The migration actually comes through here in mid April. So we're getting a lot of the birds that, songbirds, real colorful songbirds. A lot of the nesting birds have already started. So the big wading birds like roseate spoonbills and great egrets. So, nature, that's one of the things about nature. It's one thing to know about how to photograph it and how to write about it. But with nature, there's also a lot of information. Every single animal that's out there is unique. Every single animal, like right now, alligators are going through their mating season. And if you've ever seen it, the males make this real rumbly sound. And that's kind of how they court other females. It can create ripples on the water. And it sounds really like when you're standing there next to when they do it, it can be a little eerie. But it's those types of things that, it only happens for a few weeks. And the more you understand about different species, the more that your photos can actually, and just the storytelling aspect can really improve. Least terns, which used to actually, I just discovered, have actually been removed from the endangered species list, but least terns, which is what this bird is, they do a really neat courtship where the males will go out, they catch these little fish called eelfish, and they bring them into the females, and the females are the one to decide whether they want to court with that male bird, and the females will kind of like tip their nose up in the air and walk away from it. It's really kind of funny. It feels like a bar, 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes, but it's a lot of fun to watch that stuff. So where did my dreams start? If you can, hear some of the things I'm already talking about. I've always had this interest in science and this interest in animals and being around animals. And I've always had this creative side. And I always kind of struggled in figuring out which one I wanted to really focus on. And what I'm doing now has been a phenomenal way to actually combine all of that. And it took me a little while to kind of learn about it. It kind of took me a while to figure out how to merge those two interests together. But where it started was that I always wanted to be a veterinarian. That was always the thing I wanted to do growing up, which I find is actually very ironic that now Rowan has a vet school, which obviously didn't exist when I was there. So things kind of come full circle sometimes, which is funny. But that's actually a perfect example. I've actually met a couple of the veterinarians that are some of the researchers there, and I have their contact information. Would love to actually work with them now. So maybe now I have found another way into that industry. But I did work in the vet industry in kind of a different way. Is that when the first job that I had out of college after graduating from Rowan was actually at a medical publishing company in Philadelphia that published veterinary books. And that was the interest that I had. And I worked in the manufacturing department. And one of the things I was responsible for was making sure the inserts, color inserts in an otherwise black and white book were actually printed well and that they looked well and that they didn't have defects in the content. So it was an interesting, like I said, it's kind of an interesting way to pull all of these different interests together and something that I would have never, when I was, let's say, 15 years old in high school, if somebody had said, would you want to work with a medical publisher? I'm like, well, I don't have a medical degree. So it's interesting how things kind of, that was an opportunity that I didn't expect. And it was one that I really, really enjoyed. And actually worked in that industry other than owning my business, that's actually where I've worked the longest. And then in 1997, after finishing my bachelor's degree, I did consider going back to vet school. I spent that summer visiting a few vet schools around the country. Colorado State here in Fort Collins, Colorado, in northern Colorado, is actually one of the best vet schools in the country. And I had come out to visit them and fell in love with Fort Collins. I fell in love with Colorado. I went up to Rocky Mountain National Park for the first time during that visit and absolutely loved it. But I did come to the realization that I really was just a little bit too far down a different path than to start over completely to go to vet school. Veterinary students, I think it's even more difficult now. It's always been a tough program to get into, and not that had scared me away from it, but the thought of coming out at that time with $100,000 in debt and coming out making less than what I was even making when I would start school just didn't, in my business side of my brain, just didn't unfortunately just didn't compute very well for me. So I decided to finish up with the path that I was on. I completed my MBA in marketing from Temple, finished in May 2002, and then by August, I was moving out to Colorado. I didn't have a job in Colorado. I didn't own a house. I knew a couple of people that lived out in Colorado, but otherwise, it was a pack up everything, move across the country, and settle in Fort Collins, actually just a few miles from the vet school. But it all wound up working out. I'm still out here. Within a couple of weeks, actually, of moving out there, I had a couple of feelers out for jobs. I did actually wind up getting a job within a few weeks. Um, and it's just kind of grown from there. So, um, I did, but so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was a little bit about how did I transition from these corporate jobs, these, marketing jobs or manufacturing jobs, advertising jobs that I've had over the years. One of the things that I've always kind of struggled with when I had office jobs, as I mentioned, I love to be outdoors. Um, and I never thought of myself as restless, but growing up in the Northeast, it was always, you go to high school, you do all the college preparatory classes, you go to college, you get an office job, maybe you go to graduate school. And so I was doing everything I had anticipated doing, but for some reason, I just never really felt satisfied with where I was. I always got antsy and, would leave jobs after 3 or 4 years trying to find something that just seemed to make me happy. I was always enjoying what I was doing, but I wasn't necessarily enjoying it where I was. And that was probably part of the reason of moving out to Colorado as well. As I mentioned, I started working in Philadelphia for a medical publishing industry, and I worked for some really big corporations, but it was just the politics of a corporate job. I know Amanda and I have talked about even the politics that can come in with big universities. Big things have a lot of layers. They have a lot of red tape. It can be for a creative person, sometimes it can be very difficult to kind of navigate through that. And I'd like to see things get done. So there was always just that kind of feeling like there was something else out there for me, but I didn't exactly know what it was. So being part of living in Colorado, obviously I had nature all around me. And I have since learned that really there's nature all around us anywhere we are. And I wish I had paid more attention to it in New Jersey because there's a lot of it out there. But there really is something everywhere. And even from a health perspective, it can be really, really important to just get outdoors each day, take a walk a dog, go look and see what birds are around you. That's why bird photography and bird watching are so popular because there's birds everywhere. Um, so it's important, but I have, discovered that there was a way to combine all of that. So nature photography really brings in people from all walks of life. There are people that have been self-taught and it's a second career for them. Some people do it when they get into retirement, they transition from a hobby into a career. Some people, Gabby Salazar is a perfect example. I would highly recommend, especially since this is, women in communications, I would look her up. She was the youngest president of NAMPA ever. She was a Nat Geo, or she is a Nat Geo explorer. I mean, she knew what she wanted to do from the time she was a teenager. She is phenomenal, very, very talented. She won all kinds of awards in NAMPA. And then now a couple of years ago, she finished her PhD in a conservation communication program down in Florida. And now she's teaching others. She's telling others how to do all this. So she's had this just amazing career. And so that's somebody that really knew what they wanted to do their whole life and followed that path. Yet there's other people similar to me that started someplace else and maybe they had a life-altering event like I did, and they find that being in nature is what kind of calms them and gets them refocused and energizes them again about something. And so you really do see people from all walks of life. I don't think there is really a traditional path to getting into this. But one thing I would say is you definitely want to learn the skills for writing, photography, cinematography, and then pursue the network to work in that field. As I mentioned before, I have kind of specialized in being that person where I can write and provide photos, so I can provide a content package. But even that is getting somewhat outdated now. AI is becoming a big part of this. Digital content, video content, all of that's becoming a really, really big part of communicating in the conservation photography world. But I did start my company in 2006. It started as a medical and veterinary communications agency. That's actually where Amanda and I met. Prior to that was we worked for a medical animation company in Fort Collins. But I left to start my company, which was originally called MedVet Communications. And then in 2012, changed it to kind of focus on just the things that I was doing, which was the photography and writing. So that was Dawn Wilson Photography. And then a couple of years ago, I actually opened a second business called Creeks and Critters Nature Tours, which is actually my photo tour business. So the two of them are actually pretty different. So I am celebrating 20 years this year, which I thought was pretty exciting that it's actually of all the things I've done, it's the one thing that's lasted the longest. So I'm impressed and proud of that. Um, and these are just a couple of covers that I've provided content for. So this is a local guide. This was the visitor guide last year in Estes Park. This is a magazine cover down in Fort Collins, which is one of my I've been working with them since they were actually the first magazine that published a cover photo of mine. So and I'll talk about it in a couple of slides. But one of the things that if you want to get started, start local. Start with these. This wasn't a paying cover, but it gave me. This is that catch 22, right? People ask, well, how do you get started? But if you want to get started, people say, well, show me your work, and you can't get work until you can. Has to give you a break. So it's this, chicken or the egg thing that you have to get published to be published. And so sometimes these not, and I do stress that you really should get paid for your work, but sometimes you need to kind of start there. So you start with these local publications that need content, but may not have a very big budget. They don't have a very big distribution list, but it's a cover. It was something I could say, I have published cover photos. So that really made a difference. These are just some of the logos that I have. So this is my photography business. This is the tour company. Um, and let's see. So you're working in this industry. I think most of us these days are really working as freelancers. There was a day that nature photographers could really make a pretty good living. One cover for, let's say, Time magazine. I know somebody that had a photo of a deer that was on the front cover of Time magazine back in the 80s, and he said it paid his mortgage for a month. Unfortunately, these days you'd be lucky to maybe make a car payment with that, in what you would get for a cover photo. But there are a lot of places that need content. So it's a volume thing now more so than a, individual piece. There are still a few full-time positions in nature photography. One of the examples I always like to give is think of visitor bureaus. Like I know a guy that works in Missouri for the state of Missouri. He's their kind of outdoor photographer, but he goes all over the state and does amazing work. And he's had a couple of really interesting book publications. He's now doing some tours, so he's expanded out a little bit as well. But he's one of the lucky ones that has a full-time position doing what he loves. I know South Dakota still has a photographer for their visitor bureau for the state of South Dakota. And he gets to travel all over the state. Visit Estes Park, even in Estes Park actually has a photographer position. So you might have to photograph some of the businesses, you might have to photograph the taffy shop, but you also get to go out at night and photograph the night skies because Estes Park's trying to become a dark sky certified location. So, that's kind of the trade-off sometimes. Some of the other things, look at publications and organizations. National Geographic is probably the most common one that people think of right off the top of their head. And yes, every single one of us hopes to get in there someday. Um, but a lot of those publications have reduced or eliminated their staff. National Geographic eliminated all their photography staff last year. Now that doesn't mean they don't still buy photography. They just don't keep them on staff anymore. So it's a little bit less expensive for them to do it that way. And then that also means that the photographers are no longer they don't have that stable income. They don't have the benefits that come with it. So it makes it a little bit tougher to make a living that way. So most of us do freelance. Even those that have full-time jobs, I think still freelance on the side, so that you can keep making a little bit more money. And that's where the beauty of it is. You can be as busy as you want. If you want to work 7 days a week and constantly go after every opportunity that's out there, that is something you can do. You just have to be really careful about burnout because it will feel like there's always something else that needs to be done. So you do have to have some guardrails around what you're doing. And I will be honest, my partner's probably listening to me thinking he's probably in there thinking that there's no way that I can't believe that she's recommending that because I don't do a very good job of that. but I do want to make sure that I can continue to afford to, live in a place like Estes Park where it is more expensive and make sure I can afford to have, health insurance and those things. So it is a balance. And you want to always make sure you're thinking about who needs that content. Magazines are the obvious choice for most people. NGOs, which are non-governmental organizations, they also need a lot of content. These are those nonprofits. Some of the big ones that come to mind are like the National Parks Conservation Association or the Sierra Club, Audubon. Those are the ones that most people think of. But think of all the other ones that are local. You think of the ones that are regional, that might be right within your backyard where you can really get to know them. Car dealerships, if you walk into a car dealership today, most of them have big prints on the walls. They have to buy them from somewhere. Art buyers are another one. Grants, I've mentioned that a couple of times. Think about what grants are out there that can maybe fund a passion project for you. And then I always like to throw this one in. Again, this is another woman I would recommend to follow if you're looking at conservation photography and conservation storytelling as an interest. Morgan Heim is very, very talented photographer, very, very business. She's really good at business. She's really good at keeping herself out there. And she wrote this, or she actually photographed this article called Trespass Country, and it published in Playboy magazine. This is not the link. I actually couldn't find the link to the actual article anymore. It's a few years old at this point, but she actually got published in Playboy. And most people would never think to connect nature and conservation storytelling with Playboy. But what the article was about was in Washington where she lives. There were marijuana growers that were actually going into national forest land and growing pot. I mean, they were growing marijuana plants. And this is what the article about how the people, the rangers and the law enforcement officers actually go in and try to stop this. So it was really an interesting way that she kind of thought outside of the box. She thought about, who else could be really interested in this? Well, if you look at the market for Playboy, it's men. There might be an interest in pot and different things. And I'm not, this is a college thing. I'm not necessarily encouraging it, but that's the audience. That's so she wound up getting an article published, a whole series of photos, and this is the link to, or you can go to her website. You can go to Morgan's website, and she has that whole series of photos, some gorgeous photos, absolutely beautiful photographs. So again, think outside of the box. You never know what you might kind of uncover as a potential opportunity. Definitely start small, start local. If you have a full-time job, it's a great way to kind of get your work published. Like I was showing that one, the Voice magazine in Fort Collins. That was something I did while I still, when I had a full-time job working for somebody else. Get involved in local camera clubs and writing organizations. Again, you can learn a lot about really specialized skills at a very low cost. Usually they have monthly photo competitions, and you can learn more about, specific ways to improve your photography. Volunteer. A lot of times you might start as donating work that could lead to paid work. I know somebody that did some work she's really into the Cheetah Conservation Fund, and she started working with them as a volunteer when she would go over to Africa and taking some photos and donating to them. And then one day they actually asked her to do a whole new set of photographs for their website. And she flat out and asked them, she's like, I'm not going to do this for free. This is my rate. And they said, okay, that's fine. We'll do that. So don't be afraid to ask for being paid, and if they say no, then sometimes you might have to turn away from it. Or if you think that the value is there, that you can continue to get more work from them in the future, take a look at it and consider it. Make sure you set goals and keep working towards them, evaluate them every year. And then enter photo contests. I know this picture on the bottom left is a little bit tough for some people to look at. It's an excellent conservation photo though, and it tells a story. If you're familiar with the bison and the impact they have when they come out of Yellowstone into the local ranching communities, this is unfortunately what happens to them. And this photo actually won me an award in the showcase competition. And one of the judges was a buyer of stock photography over in England, and she said it was one of the best conservation photos that she had seen because the impact was there, the story was there, and as a result of that, I now had a new contact that led to to additional work for me. So you never, so again, photo contests have great exposure, especially the bigger ones. Just be really careful about copyright ownership. Make sure you retain the copyrights. This is just like anything else. This is a business, and you want to make sure you're making wise business choices. Definitely get involved in national organizations. NAMPA is one I highly recommend. They are the only one dedicated to nature photography in North America. And they also have a college scholarship program. Every year, every other year, right now we're running every other year on holding our conference, which is called Summit. And at Summit, they actually have a week-long program for college students that is fully funded. If you can apply to win the scholarship to attend Summit. And while you're there, you actually build a program working with a local nonprofit. So wherever the summit is being held, like the last one was being held in Tucson, and they worked with a local Audubon. So they built a photo portfolio, they built a video for Audubon. So now all these students have a portfolio piece based on that. ASMP is another really good organization. It's really good for learning about the business of photography, especially, media photography, selling to editorial, that kind of thing. They have all kinds of resources in regards to, contracts and photo releases and how to price your photos, that kind of thing. If you're into writing, Outdoor Writers Association of America is another great place to do a lot of networking. Girls Who Click is an organization, especially if you're still in college. I believe it's up to 25 or 28, somewhere in the mid to late 20s. You can be what they would call a student. And then you have a mentor. So myself and some other women photographers, we actually mentor some of the girls who are in the organization. And then we hold some free events around the country throughout the year as well. But it's all networking. It's all really good ways to connect with other people that are in the industry, doing the things that you are hoping to do. I will be honest, that making a living is tough. Just like I said, living in Estes Park is tough. Making a living in this industry can be tough. You just have to be persistent. You have to be your own advocate. Nobody else will do it for you. Just keep pushing through, be patient, be persistent. And it can happen. I know people that are making it happen. You definitely have to have multiple streams of income. So think about that. My multiple streams, I do on occasion have a full-time job in addition to running my businesses full-time, so that I can kind of, maybe get to a goal that I have to achieve. Or like during COVID, things, I had to do a lot of photo tours, and all of a sudden everybody stopped traveling. So I did take a job with a newspaper, doing their writing, but it gave me, those 800 credits, those 800 bylines came from working for that newspaper, and it got my name out there even more. So it actually led into more opportunities for me. So you never know, don't look at some of these opportunities as, kind of taking a step back, but, maybe look at it as an opportunity to an open door for more work. You definitely have to stay organized. When you have multiple streams of income, it means you have multiple audiences. It means you have multiple billing and accounting and all the kinds of things that come along with running a business. And each one of those people, each one of those organizations is going to think that they're the top priority. So you do have to stay very organized. These are some of the ways that people in this industry make money. So you've got copyright infringement. I know it sounds strange, but there are actually people making some decent money on people stealing their photos, especially in this digital age. So do the copyright submissions, and work with an agency that actually, there are law firms that actually specialize in finding your photos being used without your permission. And then they'll go after and make sure you get paid for that. Stock images can still make a little bit of money, definitely not what it used to be, but it's another passive form of income. Editorial work, writing, stock video, social media. I know people that are making tons of money each month on social media videos. YouTube, that's another way. Do a lot of teaching videos. Teaching classes, publishing. I have a book that I published a couple years ago. I do a lot of, I'm getting ready that Colorado project will lead into a book. So it'll be another book that I'll have to sell. I print calendars each year. You can sell photo prints, you can do video production. And then there's always assignment work. There is still a lot of assignment work being done out there. And don't be afraid to take other work. As a photographer, you can do really, really good things with weddings or elopement photos. You can do headshots, events. It's all good income to kind of support what you're doing. Think about golf courses. Golf courses are outdoors. It's a landscape. So so you have the skills for that, even if it's not necessarily what you're thinking as the traditional work. Stay true to your dreams, stay focused on your goals, and it is a jar of rocks. If you've ever heard, think of a jar, and if you put in, the big goals are those big rocks. But if you start adding in sand and small pebbles in there, those tend to be the things that kind of settle to the bottom. Those are the things that kind of become the pebble in a shoe that you have to take care of. Make sure you're focused on those big rocks within that jar. The other thing, at one point, I want, and I've got to, I'll kind of get this wrapped up here so you have some time for questions. But one of the things that a photo editor had told me one time was that I was too diversified and had too many photos, too many things. She said that she told me, she's like, I have this one photographer that I know I can go to because all he photographs are frogs in his region. And my response to her was, I can't make a living on photographing just frogs. I have to have a diversified portfolio because I never know what people are going to want. Now, where I live, there are a ton of elk in the area, so I photograph a lot of elk. There's a whole organization dedicated to just elk. So I sell a lot of photos with them, but I also have other animals that I really enjoy photographing. Dippers are one of them. This is an American dipper. This is a bird unique to North America and in particular to the mountains of the West. They are the only aquatic songbird in North America. You can see this photo in the upper left. He's actually diving into water. They actually get all of their food out of the water and they always live along water. I happen to have them right in Estes Park. There's several nests. I have probably a dozen nests nearby me, and they live there all year long, so I can photograph in all seasons. Keep it local. I know places to go for these birds. I know different behaviors. I know different seasons, what they do each season, where they go. So it allows me to say, hey, I have a massive portfolio of these birds. Let's say Audubon wanted to do a story on them, or a film crew wanted to come in and say, all right, we need to do some filming of these birds. I may not necessarily get hired to do the cinematography for the program, but I could be their resource and their guide for knowing where to go for these things. So I have that knowledge base, a deep knowledge base about this particular bird. So use those special skills that you have. If you have a scubing certification, if you have a drone license, tell people that you have that. That differentiates you from the other 50 photographers or writers or cinematographers that are also looking for those same jobs. Master a particular topic. I mentioned that with the dippers. I love this quote. If your dreams don't scare you, they're too small. So definitely pursue those dreams. Think outside the box, and try for those opportunities. And here's another slide with photos that pop up. I apologize for that. So I do work with an organization called Dark Sky Colorado. It's part of Dark Sky International, which helps raise awareness about the impacts of light pollution on wildlife. And that's kind of another one of my passion projects. Just like the dippers, I do a lot of photography at night, just to tell that story about why we do need to protect the night skies. These passion projects can lead to lots of stories and connections. They can give you focus. They can be a creative outlet if you need to work outside in the industry. And always give presentations about these things. You never know, somebody in the audience might go, hey, I need to hire somebody for this. Or if you have a book, you could sell books. You could do all these different things. So again, always things that are, nope, this didn't work either. That has a video. That is it looks like something happened with it when I saved this. So my apologies on that. But always think about, just sharing the stories that you have. So here are my final thoughts. Know who you are, be honest with yourself, know what you want to do, and don't get yourself boxed in. Think outside the box, outside of that box as to where do I really want to be? What do I want to be doing in 10 years? Do I want to be sitting in a cubicle in a corporate office, or would I rather be outside? And if I'd rather be outside, how do I make a living doing that? And how do I not get myself overwhelmed on how to do that? So be patient, be persistent. And just kind of follow those dreams, can make connections, always strive to learn more, become an expert in one or two areas. Another woman that I always admire on her work is this woman, Amy Gulick. She published a book called Salmon in the Trees. And what she discovered was, so she lives up in the Northwest. She's up in Washington, near the Salish Sea. And she went up, she wanted to do a project about the Tongass National Forest in Southeast Alaska. It was an area where they were actually looking, they continue to try to fight to put road systems into that national forest. They want to cut down a lot of the forest, and it's the last remaining. Oh, I forget how it's actually described, but I know it's the last remaining like tropical rainforest in Alaska, or continuous. It has, there's a special designation for it in regards to the size and type of forest it is. But what she discovered was that the salmon that migrate through there, that go back into the streams and rivers, and they spawn and then they die off. When those fish die off, they actually, when they degrade and they become part of the soil, then the soil actually uses those nutrients to grow trees, and they grow more trees, and now the trees are now having life for other animals. So they call it salmon in the trees, and she did this whole really interesting project about it. So again, I recommend taking a look at how she did that. She's another one that's been really influential in my own work in regards to telling stories. And then my final thought for you, the most compelling photographs you take begin with the things about which you're most passionate and most curious. I hope I have shown that um, as my own interest in wildlife and animals and being outdoors, and I've turned that into a way to make a living. Maybe I don't make as much if I stayed in that gray cubicle, but I am way happier in not sitting in a gray cubicle. So, um, just a couple things. I do have tours. I do private tours, group tours. I do international and domestic workshops. I would take a look at ccnaturetours.com. I had a book, 100 things. I published a book, 100 things to do in Estes Park. Um, and then this is my contact information. So I will leave it on this slide. I'll escape out of that. And then I'll stop share and then we can go through questions. Oh, I don't see
Yeah.
any new questions in the chat.
Yeah, if you do, I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We do have a few minutes left. We have one that just popped up here. Before we address that question, I did want to mention a couple things. One, thank you so much for such an inspiring talk, and it's clear you're very passionate about that. And I think one of the key words that I heard is storytelling, which I think can resonate so much with all of us who are in communication and arts and those sorts of fields. So thank you for that. And I did want to mention that you heard Dawn talk about Amanda several times, and that's Professor Amanda Ullman, who is also with us today. So thanks for being here. Professor Ullman is a professor was past coordinator and still helps run the biomedical art and visualization program here at Rowan. So if you are a Rowan student and you are interested in communication, video, art as it relates to science and biology, you should definitely connect with Professor Almonds. It's really fascinating, interesting stuff there. So let's see what we do. We had a question. Could you talk about an assignment experience you had? Who was the sponsor and what was the content for?
There was one I did not that long ago where it was for Wyoming Wildlife, which is a magazine that I work with out of Wyoming. So it's the magazine for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and they wanted a photo essay about destinations in Wyoming that are really good for wildlife, but not the usuals. They didn't want Yellowstone. They didn't want Grand Teton National Park. They didn't want all the places that people think of first. So I got to travel all over the state of Wyoming. I think there were 6 locations, and found all these really cool things. I found locations where there were fields of lupin with white-tailed deer in them. I found places where um, I also discovered on that trip that Google is not the best always for directions, but I went down to this place called Seedskedee National Wildlife Refuge, which has all kinds of really cool animals along the Green River in the southwest part of Wyoming. So the content was basically to talk. It was an article that I wrote as well as the photographs, and it was basically kind of a travel article all around wildlife about, where can I go? Think outside the box. We can keep kind of talking about that concept. So it was, they do pay they pay okay. I mean, they do a pretty good job on paying. And it was a great way to even learn about new places that I had not been to before, and kind of think of a concept around, in a state like Wyoming, you have everything from prairie to mountains, very high mountains. So how do you tell that story in a visual perspective when you only have about a week I think I was out for about 10 days. So I got to travel all over the state. So that was a cool project. And sometimes those come to me, and sometimes I pitch them to other people. So I think that's another thing to always keep in mind, that if you have ideas, just keep try to pitch it out there.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, not to just wait for someone to necessarily ask you to do something. And we also have a question actually from Professor Phillimworth, who has brought her Intro to Writing Art students here today. So thank you for that, Grace. And it's actually a question that I had about AI. You mentioned it several times before, and Dr. Copenhaver at the Copenhaver Center at FIU has had several really fascinating workshops on AI and the field. And so I would think in particular with photography, it would be really, because my understanding is AI is also, gathering images
Hmm.
from all sorts of databases, like your website, for example. So if you were to say, I want a photo of an elk, it could very well be yours. And I understand, I guess you could go and then sue them. Maybe, I'm not sure. So Grace's specific question is, could you talk a little more about the changes you're seeing either in photography or writing related to AI, and whether that's positive or negative? Because there's certainly, it's not all negative either. But yeah, what are your thoughts about how things are changing for the good or bad with AI?
So I think I have three things, and I'll try to use it that way, to
Clearly, you've thought
remember
about this.
all the
You
different
have a
points.
list.
First, I would say take a look at what NAMPA is doing. So NAMPA, because they are kind of the organization out there, are advocating for creatives. They are really working on getting laws passed that protect the art that's being developed. That's one of the things that I think is the biggest challenge for creatives, is that AI can take your work, and then who owns it? Is it the software company that developed the AI? Is it the photographer that created the photograph to begin with? Is it the person that's using the software and the photograph to create something new out of it? There are a lot of questions around that. And I think that's the biggest challenge. So that would be the second point, is, what are the opportunities and threats in regards to AI? The threats are definitely, who will own that? And they don't know that answer just yet. That's an evolving situation right now. But the opportunities are, I mean, think of it. I mean, like, I'll use an example. I recently had somebody that loved a bison photo that I had, but they wanted it sideways. It was a profile photo of a bison walking directly toward you if you were looking at the photo. They wanted it sideways, but the same thing. So I threw it into AI to try to figure out, I can create it as my own photograph, but in a different way that I don't have a physical file of. So there are a lot of opportunities, I think, that are really going to evolve that way. It will be important from an ethical standpoint to make sure that you are honest about it being created with AI. And then the other thing is that as I use AI, writing in particular, with writing it, as a writer, I was like, no, I'm not using AI. I'm not allowing it to do my writing for me. A lot of times when I use it, though, it actually does sound kind of better. So usually what I'll do is I'll write something and I might throw it into like ChatGPT to actually clean it up, to maybe make it a little fresher, a little bit more, competitive to what else is out there in the market. Because there's no way I can spend the time to see what other people are saying. It can do it much, much faster for me. So from a marketing perspective, I think it works really well that way. What I would advise on is make sure that you are not putting content out there, on like a public forum of ChatGPT. Make sure you're doing it within an account so that you protect yourself. And I have heard, my understanding is that even a paid account is even more protection for you, because then it isn't using it to filter into everybody else's work that they're producing out there. So I think those would be the three things that I would say about AI. It's
And
not
I
going
also,
anywhere, so we have to
it's not
embrace
going
it.
anywhere. And I also, well, I teach sort of media literacy classes, is kind of where I would describe myself as a professor. And the awareness of what AI is and what isn't AI, I think, is also interesting. We just had I'm in the Copenhaver suite that Dr. Copenhaver generously um, contributed to, so that we could have this wonderful space that we look out on the patio, and we have the baseball field is out there. And I just got stick. We had this baseball watch party. All of this is leading somewhere, but we had these stickers, and my son is an art major. Actually, he works with Professor Allman, and he was like, "Way to buy AI art, mom." Like I had offended him, whatever. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" I don't know if you can see this sticker. There's a sticker that I bought, and I was like, "How is that AI?" And I bought it because I love the little, "You can do it." First of all, I don't know why there was a beer. That was inappropriate. So I just bought a whole pack. But then he was like, "Mom, how is the baseball hole?" You could tell it's AI because where's the handle on the beer thing, and where he's holding nothing. So I didn't even think about that. And so I think if the more this is out here, the more we'll get savvy about it too, and using it, I guess, for our benefits, like you were talking about, making the buffalo or the bison sideways. This is pretty interesting. Sorry, but that was kind of tangential, but it's just been making me think about how it's clearly everywhere.
Yeah,
And
it
so being
is.
aware of it.
Yeah,
We
it's
had
very
another,
much like the internet was, right? When the
right,
internet first
exactly.
started, it
And
was kind of a free for all. It was like, the Great American West. It was you could do what you want, and it's still in that phase right now. So there will be guardrails added to it at some point, but I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what it can do, and the tech companies are staying ahead of all of us, I think, a lot
yeah,
faster.
when I was in grad school, and then I'm old, and I was in grad school, and our professor, it was like the internet was just coming out, and um, the professor was like, "We're going to do chat rooms. What do they call bulletin boards where we're all going to post." And I was like having a panic attack, like, how am I going to go on? And we're going to write things and talk to each other on the internet. It's just so funny. And of course, now we do those kinds of things every day, all
Mhm.
day long.
Yep.
We did, speaking of chats, with one more question. That's probably gonna, if you have one more, let me know, but that'll probably be all we have time for today. Um, this is a great question. How do you go about pitching a project to an organization?
So usually the first thing I do is take a look at their website. I know it sounds very basic and fundamental, but take a look at their website, get familiar with them, learn, what kinds of things are they doing, what kinds of projects have they already published, so don't repeat what they already have. And then find out who like their communications director is, find out who maybe their marketing director is. Send them a letter, just introduce yourself, tell them a little bit, and keep it to one page. I mean, we're all busy these days. Keep it to one page. Tell them who you are, tell them what you can bring to the table, tell them about what idea you have, and then wrap it up with a follow-up, and then make sure you follow up. Make sure you do, send them an email. One of the little tips that a lot of times you can find is if you look for emails, a lot of times you can kind of figure out what the format of the email is, whether it's like first initial, last name at whatever organization.org. I mean, you can take a look at the website and kind of figure that piece out. Look at LinkedIn. A lot of times on LinkedIn, you can find out, different connections. Maybe you know somebody that knows somebody there. Use them. Like just recently, a friend of mine, somebody I consider my mentor, just recommended me to a tour company in Africa, because they're actually giving away free familiarity tours. I still have to pay to get over there, but now it's going to be an opportunity for me to go over there, visit their location, spend a week in Tanzania, and but then in return, I have to bring tours to them. So it's a benefit for both of us. But that was just a connection. So you never, and so just a quick email. And now I emailed the director and said, I saw that you're doing a familiarity tour. This is my experience. I would, be able to do X, Y, and Z. I'd like to, let's follow up and talk maybe in a week or so. So I think those, it sounds pretty fundamental, but it's still very much the same way it used to be, is do a little research, reach out and then follow up, do and make sure you do what you say. If you're going to follow up in a week, follow up in a week. Um, and
And you
again,
think a week is a good amount of time for the students or whoever to wait about a week to follow up?
Um, yeah, I would say, a week to 2 weeks. A lot of times because anything more than that, and you'll start to the emails start to pile up and it might
Right.
get buried in there. You can, hey, just floating this back to it's very much like what you and I did. Yeah, I'm
Right.
just floating this back to the top of the email list and
Yeah.
just following up on it. And um, you know, I still every once in a while I still like to send something in writing. I think that's a rare thing that people don't do much these days anymore, and I think that helps stand out. So again, you want to think of those unique pieces. There was a day that you never showed what you look like, and unfortunately, all our information's out there these days. So, so maybe there's like a video clip that you could, if you have video content that you could show, maybe a sample reel or, make it interactive. So those kinds of things can be good too.
And then thank you. And Professor Phillinworth actually had a part two of her question. Sorry, Grace. And we will conclude on that. Do you have a specific, or do you have a piece of specific or concrete writing advice you could share? Because again, she's brought her intro to writing art students, which is one of our majors in the college.
I will share a story from my Rowan days. Dr. Shapiro, Stephen Shapiro was my journalism teacher. I had him for 2 or 3 semesters of classes. And in one of the classes, I had a writing assignment where I misspelled one of the people's names in the article. And it was the only time I ever failed an assignment, and he allowed me to fix it. But he said, you never do it. And to this day, I continue to, I check every single name every single time I submit something. There is nothing more, if you get something in print and somebody's name is spelled wrong, it doesn't matter how good that article is. They will remember that much more so than the great content around it. So that's one little piece of advice. The other thing is be very consistent. I have this bad habit. I like to be a little bit more flowery than I probably should be. I can remember days where you could submit a 2-page pitch letter, or you could, like if I wanted to submit a book pitch, they literally tell you you have to pitch the whole book in like two sentences. So you have to be very, very, very concise these days. If you ever watched a movie called A River Runs Through It, the kids were homeschooled, and the older son wanted to be an English professor, and his father, who was teaching him writing, said, very good. Now half the length. And he'd send him back upstairs to rewrite it again. Very good. Now half the length. And he comes back, and by the time he's done after 3 or 4 revisions, it's all it is three sentences. And he balls it up, throws it in the trash. He's like, all right, go fish. So it's that kind of thing. Always think about how you can tighten up your writing. I think that goes a long way, especially in our busy world today.
Every time I talk about or think about typos and stuff, I always remember my mother worked for Virginia Tech's graduate program. I forget, it was biology, when I was a baby, I think. And it was back when, speaking of technology and changes, you hand typed everything. And so the professor would give research that they were doing, manuscripts, to my mother, and my mother would then type them. And she had typed this whole very long project about a fruit fly. And it turns out, and then like the professor scrawl, but everywhere it was actually a frit fly. There actually is something called a frit fly. And so she had to retype the entire thing by hand, not with fruit fly, it was frit fly. So
Yeah. Yeah. And there are those little details can really change a
especially
whole
with, I
piece.
think, especially with people's names, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
People work. Yeah, absolutely.
I
Dawn,
know it
thank you
sounds like a
so
little
much.
thing, but I think in the long run it goes a long way.
Yeah, and thank you so much. We're almost at 3:15. So thank you so much for joining us today. Very inspiring talk about your untraditional but passionate trajectory. So thank you very much. And can students reach out to you at the email that you had? Would you be
Yes.
fine with doing that? So if you a photography student, writing student, communication student who loves photography, someone interested in science and communication, feel free to reach out. Thank you, everyone, for
Oh,
joining us. If you're in New Jersey, it's a glorious day. Hopefully, it's glorious wherever you are as well. So go enjoy the weather and be well. Thank you again. Appreciate you.
thank you.
Thank you, Don. Yay. Great. Nice, Julie. Nice, Don.
Yay, thanks for coming.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. I have to email you, Don. Got a lot to catch up on.
Yes, we do.
I know.
Hopefully I'll get out to Jersey this summer.
I know. I know. I got to get you some Wawa, some tasty cakes. I learned all of that in the last 12 years. What makes Jersey Jersey? And I could drive on the turnpike so much better now after
There
10
you
years.
go.
All
All right. Yeah,
right.
let's catch up.
Bye. Bye,
I
Bye.
don't want to go
everybody.
fool
Thanks,
anybody.
Julie.
All righty. Thanks again.